A cold wind howled through the empty streets as Evelyn Walker clutched the faded newspaper in her trembling hands. The yellowed edges of the paper crinkled as her eyes locked onto the headline, 27 years ago, an entire class vanished without a trace. The familiar ache in her chest resurfaced, just as it had every time she revisited this nightmare. Her son, Daniel, had been one of those students. One moment, he was boarding a bus for a school field trip, and the next, he was gone along with every other child in his class. No calls, no ransom notes, no traces. Just an entire group of children swallowed by the unknown. For nearly 3 decades, she had searched, clinging to hope even as the world told her to let go. Investigators had exhausted every lead, authorities had closed the case, and the town had long since stopped whispering about the mystery. But Evelyn never stopped looking. She refused to. And now, just when she had started to lose faith, something had changed. It was a small detail, something that should have been meaningless. A routine moment in an ordinary day. She had been riding the subway, lost in thought, when she noticed a teenage boy offering his seat to a pregnant woman. It was a simple act of kindness, one that shouldn't have meant anything. But when the woman turned and handed the boy a note, something inside Evelyn shifted. She recognized the gesture, the hesitation in the woman's hands, the way her fingers curled around the paper. It was familiar. Too familiar. Evelyn had seen that same movement before. Decades ago, when Daniel was still a little boy. It was the same way he used to pass notes to his friends, the same nervous twitch in his fingers. A habit so small, so insignificant, that no one else would have noticed. But a mother notices everything. Her pulse quickened as she watched the boy unfold the note, his expression shifting from confusion to something else, something closer to fear. He glanced around, as if searching for whoever had left it for him. But the woman was already gone, vanished into the crowded station. Evelyn's heart pounded as she moved closer, trying to get a better look at the note in his hands. The boy turned it over, his fingers tracing the edges, and for a brief moment, Evelyn saw the handwriting. And then, she stopped breathing. It was Daniel's. She knew it, without a doubt. The slanted letters, the way certain words looped together, it was her son's handwriting, unchanged despite the decades that had passed. But how? How was that possible? He had been missing for 27 years. He would be a grown man now, if he were even still alive. The teenager folded the note quickly, shoving it into his pocket, and Evelyn knew she had to act fast. She stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice unsteady. "I couldn't help but notice that note. Where did you get it?" The boy hesitated, his dark eyes studying her cautiously. He looked like he wanted to lie, to brush her off, but something in her expression must have changed his mind. With a sigh, he pulled the note back out and held it up. "I don't know," he admitted. "That lady just gave it to me. It's weird, right?" Evelyn's hands shook as she reached for the paper. The message was short, hastily written, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Find the others. Time is running out." Her vision blurred as memories crashed over her, the missing posters, the dead-end searches, the unanswered prayers. She looked at the boy, desperation rising in her chest. "You don't understand," she whispered. "This is my son's handwriting. He's been missing for almost 30 years. The teenager's expression darkened. He glanced around, suddenly uneasy. "I don't know what's going on," he said. "But I have a feeling this isn't a coincidence." Evelyn nodded, gripping the note like it was a lifeline. She had spent years begging for a sign, any sign, that her son was still out there. And now, when she had least expected it, she had found one. But if Daniel was alive, where had he been all this time? And why was he warning them now? A chill ran down her spine as she realized the truth. This wasn't just a message. It was a warning. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she clutched the note, her mind racing through a storm of emotions. The teenager in front of her shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the subway station as if expecting someone to be watching them. The weight of the message was sinking in for both of them. This wasn't just some coincidence or cruel joke. Someone, Daniel, was reaching out after all these years. But why now? And why through a stranger? Evelyn took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. "I need to know more," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "That woman who gave you the note, can you remember anything about her? What she looked like? Anything at all?" The boy hesitated, clearly uneasy. She was older, maybe late 50s or early 60s. White hair, but not completely grey. She wore a long coat, one of those old-fashioned ones. She barely looked at me when she handed it over, just slipped it into my hand and left. I thought she might be asking for help, but then she was gone before I could say anything. Evelyn's heart pounded. That description didn't sound like Daniel, but it meant someone out there knew something. Someone had been waiting for the right moment to pass along this message. She glanced around the station, scanning faces, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. But there was no sign of the woman. "Do you still have the note?" she asked. The teenager handed it to her, and she examined it more closely. The ink was slightly smudged, as if written in a hurry. The message itself was chilling in its urgency. "Find the others. Time is running out." The others. Did that mean Daniel wasn't the only one who had been taken all those years ago? Evelyn had spent decades believing the worst, convinced she would never see her son again. But if he was alive, if there were others, what had happened to them? Where had they been all this time? A rush of adrenaline coursed through her veins. This was the first real lead she had in years, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. She looked back at the teenager. "Thank you for telling me this," she said. "What's your name?" "Malik," he answered. "Malik, this means more to me than you know. I don't know how or why this happened, but I need to find out. If you see that woman again, if anything else happens, you have to let me know." Malik nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah. Okay. This is kinda freaking me out, though." "I know," Evelyn admitted. "But I can't ignore this." She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, Malik spoke again. "Wait," he said. "There's something else." She stopped, looking back at him. "What is it?" "When she handed me the note," he said slowly, "I think she whispered something. I didn't catch it at first, but now that I'm thinking about it, she said something about a train." Evelyn's stomach clenched. A train. Could that mean where Daniel had been all this time? Or where he was now? She nodded. "Thank you, Malik. That might be important." With the note clenched in her hand, she hurried up the subway steps, her thoughts spinning. She needed to figure out her next move. This note wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. As she reached street level, the city noise surrounded her, the honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the hum of life moving forward. But for Evelyn, time had just rewound 27 years. She was back in that moment, the day her son disappeared. The phone call from the school. The desperate searches. The way his room remained untouched for years, as if he might walk through the door any second. And now, he was reaching out. She hurried to her apartment, unlocking the door with shaking hands. She spread the note out on her kitchen table, studying every inch of it. The handwriting was unmistakable, but was it possible that Daniel had written this recently? Or was this something from the past, finally making its way to her now? She needed answers. Pulling out an old box from her closet, she rifled through decades of news clippings and photographs. The case had made headlines for years before fading into obscurity. But Evelyn never let it go. She flipped through missing person posters, notes from investigators, anything that might connect to what was happening now. Then she saw it. A detail she had forgotten, buried under years of pain and unanswered questions. The bus that took the children on their field trip, the last place they were seen, had been heading toward an old train depot just outside the city. A train. She grabbed her phone and searched for any information on the abandoned depot. It had been shut down years before the children vanished, but the school had used it as part of an educational program. Reports had mentioned it in passing, but nothing had ever suggested it was where the children disappeared. What if they had been looking in the wrong place all along? Evelyn's hands shook as she closed the box. She didn't have a plan yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She had to go to that train depot. Evelyn sat in her dimly lit apartment, the note resting on the table in front of her. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. The words "find the others. Time is running out" kept echoing in her head. If Daniel was alive, if the other children were out there somewhere, then where had they been all these years? And why now, why, after nearly 3 decades, was someone trying to make contact? She knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help, but she also knew how this sounded. A class of children vanishing without a trace, only for one of them to suddenly reach out 27 years later. The police had closed the case long ago, and even when she had pushed them to keep looking, they had nothing new to go on. This time had to be different. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she landed on the name of the only person who might believe her, Detective Liam Carter. He had worked the case back when he was just a rookie, and though he had moved on to other assignments, he had always told her that he wished they had been able to do more. Maybe now, with something concrete, he'd listen. The phone rang twice before a groggy voice answered. Carter. Liam, it's Evelyn. I need to see you. There was a pause, then a sigh. Evelyn, it's late. I know, she said quickly. But I got a message. From Daniel. Another pause. This one longer. That's not possible. It is, she insisted. A boy at the subway, he was given a note by a woman. And the handwriting, Liam, it looks just like Daniel's. Silence again. She could almost hear him piecing it together in his head, deciding if he was about to get dragged back into something he had tried to leave behind. Meet me at the diner on 6th, he finally said. 20 minutes. Evelyn barely took the time to grab her coat before rushing out the door. When she arrived at the diner, Carter was already there, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked older than she remembered, lines etched into his face from years on the force, but his eyes still held the same sharpness. She slid into the seat across from him and pulled out the note. He read it, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a slow breath. You said a woman gave this to the boy? Yes. He didn't recognize her, but she whispered something about a train before she left. Carter's jaw tightened. You think this has something to do with the old train depot? Evelyn nodded. It's the only connection I can think of. That was their last known location. What if we missed something back then? What if they were never taken away from that place, but kept there? Carter ran a hand through his graying hair. We searched that place top to bottom. There was nothing there, Evelyn. Then why would Daniel mention a train now? She pressed. Why would someone go through all this trouble to send a message if it didn't mean something? He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he sipped his coffee, thinking. Look, he finally said, I'll go with you. But if we don't find anything, you need to let this go. I mean it, Evelyn. She didn't respond. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. The next morning, they made the drive out to the abandoned train depot, a rusting skeleton of a place that had long since been swallowed by time. The tracks were overgrown with weeds, the station falling apart. It looked exactly as she remembered, lifeless. But something about it felt different now, as if it had been hiding a secret all these years. Evelyn and Carter stepped cautiously over the debris, peering into the broken windows of the old station. Dust covered the floors, and shattered glass crunched beneath their feet. Where do we even start? Carter asked. Evelyn walked toward the remains of the platform. The metal sign hanging above it was barely legible, its paint chipped and faded. But as she studied the ground, something caught her eye. A section of the floor didn't look as worn down as the rest. She knelt and ran her fingers over it. This would look newer, she said. Like it's been replaced at some point. Carter crouched beside her, knocking against it. A hollow sound echoed back. His eyes met hers. There's something under here, he said. He pulled a pocket knife from his jacket and wedged it between the boards, prying at the edges until the wood gave way with a creak. Beneath it was darkness, a narrow tunnel leading downward. A rush of cold air seeped out, carrying with it a damp, stale smell. Evelyn's heart pounded. Oh my God. Carter pulled a flashlight from his belt and aimed it into the opening. The tunnel stretched beyond where the light could reach, a passage leading underground. This wasn't in any of the original blueprints, he muttered. No one ever mentioned tunnels beneath the depot. Then we're the first ones to find it, Evelyn said. Carter hesitated, then swung his legs over the edge and dropped down. Evelyn followed, landing on solid ground. The tunnel walls were lined with old brick, damp with condensation. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. As they moved deeper inside, the walls closed in slightly, and a faint sound echoed ahead, something rhythmic, like dripping water. Then, faintly, something else. A voice. Evelyn froze. Did you hear that? Carter's grip on his flashlight tightened. Yeah. They pressed forward, hearts hammering, until they reached a rusted metal door at the end of the tunnel. It was slightly ajar. Carter pushed it open. Inside was a large, underground chamber. Dim overhead lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Old furniture, rusting equipment, and scattered belongings littered the floor. But it was what was in the center of the room that made Evelyn's breath catch. A series of small beds, lined in neat rows, as if frozen in time. Dust-covered textbooks stacked haphazardly. A faded chalkboard against one wall, the faintest trace of old writing still visible. It was a classroom. A classroom buried beneath the earth. Carter took a slow step forward, scanning the room. What is this place? Evelyn swallowed hard. I think this is where they took them. She turned, her eyes landing on something against the far wall. A framed photograph, its glass cracked and smudged with dust. She walked toward it, heart pounding, and wiped away the grime. Her breath hitched. It was a class picture. And there, in the second row, staring back at her with familiar eyes, was Daniel. Evelyn's hands trembled as she held the cracked frame, her eyes locked onto Daniel's face. He looked exactly as he had on the day he vanished, same innocent smile, same neatly combed hair. Time hadn't touched him. A chill ran down her spine. How was this possible? Carter stepped beside her, his jaw tightening as he examined the photograph. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. How could this be here? How could it be untouched for 27 years? Evelyn swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. This wasn't just some abandoned place, she whispered. Someone was down here. Someone, she hesitated, glancing at the perfectly arranged beds, the faded books still lined neatly on a shelf. Someone was living down here. Carter turned toward the walls, running his fingers over faint marks. Numbers. Tally marks scratched into the surface, stretching from the floor to as high as a child could reach. Days, he said grimly. Somebody was counting the days. A faint sound echoed through the tunnel behind them. A shuffle. A breath. Evelyn's stomach clenched. She and Carter exchanged a glance before he slowly reached for his gun. Who's there? Carter called, his voice firm but careful. Silence. Then, a creak. A shadow flickered near the doorway. Evelyn's pulse hammered. She took a step forward before Carter grabbed her wrist, shaking his head. Wait, he whispered. A footstep. Closer this time. And then, a whisper. A voice barely above a breath. You found it. Evelyn's body went rigid. The voice was familiar, distant yet unmistakable. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the darkened doorway. A figure stood just beyond the light's reach. Carter raised his flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. Evelyn gasped. A man stood there, his clothes worn and dirty, his face gaunt and pale. But it was his eyes that made Evelyn's breath catch. Eyes she had memorized. Eyes that mirrored the boy in the photograph. Daniel, she whispered. The man didn't move at first, just staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something like recognition. Then, slowly, he took a hesitant step forward. You shouldn't have come here, he said, his voice hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in years. Evelyn took a step closer. Daniel, is it really you? He looked past her, his gaze darting toward the open tunnel behind them. Panic flickered across his face. You don't understand, he whispered. You need to leave. Now. Carter stiffened. What are you talking about? Who did this to you? Where is everyone else? Daniel flinched at the questions, his eyes darkening. They don't want you to know, he said. They never did. And now that you're here. He swallowed hard. They won't let you leave. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. A sound rumbled through the tunnel behind them. A low, distant click. The unmistakable sound of a door locking. Evelyn spun toward the entrance, but the darkness swallowed the path. Then, from somewhere beyond the shadows. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. Evelyn's breath hitched as the slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the tunnel. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen but undeniably present. Carter instinctively placed himself in front of her, his grip tightening around the flashlight as he aimed it toward the dark corridor. Daniel's face paled further, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. They know you're here, he whispered urgently. They've always known. Evelyn's heart pounded. Who? Daniel's lips parted, but before he could speak, the light above them flickered violently, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The air shifted, growing colder as if something unnatural had slithered through the tunnel. Then, the footsteps stopped. Silence. A thick, Suffocating silence. Carter exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around the flashlight. He turned toward Daniel. "Start talking. Now." Daniel took a shaky step forward, his eyes pleading. "You have to trust me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much time." Evelyn swallowed hard, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to run, but where? They were underground, trapped in a place untouched for nearly 3 decades. And yet, it wasn't abandoned. Someone or something had kept it this way. Carter glanced toward the darkened tunnel. "If you know what's going on, you better start explaining." Daniel hesitated, then exhaled. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he murmured. "We were just kids. We were supposed to come home." Evelyn's stomach clenched. "Then what happened?" Daniel took another step forward, his voice trembling. "They took us," he said. "One by one. We didn't know why at first. We thought it was some kind of sick game." His fingers twitched at his sides. "But then we stopped aging." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "What?" Daniel's face twisted with something between fear and resignation. "We were supposed to disappear. We did disappear. But we never left." Carter exchanged a glance with Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "That's not possible," he said. Daniel shook his head. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't tried to understand?" His voice cracked, raw with something deeper than fear. "We're stuck. Frozen in time. But now that you're here, they're going to make sure you never leave, either." A sharp, metallic clang rang through the tunnel. Evelyn flinched, whipping toward the source. The sound wasn't distant anymore. It was close. Too close. Carter took a step back, positioning himself between Evelyn and whatever lurked in the shadows. "Who are they?" he demanded. Daniel swallowed. "Not who," he whispered. "What?" The lights above them flickered again, plunging the tunnel into darkness for a split second. When they came back, something had changed. The doorway they had come through, once open, a clear way out, was now bricked over. Sealed. Like it had never been there at all. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "No," she whispered. Daniel's voice was hollow. "I told you. There's no way out." Carter stepped forward, pressing his palm against the cold stone. He pounded against it, once, twice. Solid. Unmoving. "This wasn't here before," he muttered. Daniel exhaled shakily. "It was." He looked up at them with tired, haunted eyes. "You just couldn't see it yet." Evelyn's head spun. The missing children. The abandoned school. The underground tunnel frozen in time. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. But the bricked-up doorway in front of them said otherwise. And the footsteps were getting closer. Carter's breath came in short, sharp bursts as he stared at the bricked-up doorway. His mind raced, trying to process the impossibility of it. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she reached out, pressing her palm against the cold surface, hoping, praying it was just some kind of illusion. But the stone was real. Solid. Unforgiving. Daniel took a step back, his eyes darting toward the darkness. "They're coming," he whispered. Evelyn turned to him, panic rising in her chest. "Who are they?" she demanded, voice breaking. "What do they want?" Daniel swallowed hard. "They need you to stay. Just like they needed us." A cold shiver crawled up Evelyn's spine. "Us," she repeated. "You mean?" Daniel's face twisted with something between fear and guilt. "We were supposed to be gone forever," he murmured. "But the moment you set foot in this place, you changed something. They can't just let you walk away now." Carter clenched his fists. "Like hell they can't," he muttered, turning back toward the tunnel. "There's gotta be another way out." He aimed the flashlight into the darkness. The beam flickered for a moment before stabilizing, revealing the long, seemingly endless corridor ahead. But something was wrong. The tunnel had shifted. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier, suffocating. And then, just at the edge of the light, something moved. A shadow. Not a person. Not quite. Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. "We have to run," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "You can't outrun them." Carter ignored him, grabbing Evelyn's wrist. "I'm not just gonna stand here and let something take us." He turned to Daniel. "Are you coming or not?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Together, they sprinted down the corridor, the flashlight bouncing wildly in Carter's grip. The air grew colder with each step, the distant sound of whispers growing louder. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against them like invisible hands trying to pull them back. And then Evelyn saw it. A door. Old, wooden, barely hanging on its hinges. Hope surged through her. There, she gasped, pointing ahead. Carter didn't slow down. He reached the door first, shoving it open with all his strength. The wood splintered under his grip, and they stumbled inside. The room beyond was small, lined with dusty shelves and broken furniture. An old chalkboard stood at the back, covered in faded writing. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, her eyes scanning the board. The names. Dozens of them. She ran her fingers over the faded chalk, heart hammering. These are the names of the missing children, she whispered. Daniel stepped up beside her, his face pale. And look at the dates. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she followed his gaze. The dates stretched back decades. Too many years. Far beyond what was possible. And then, at the very bottom, 2 new names had been added in fresh, white chalk. Carter Blake. Evelyn Carter. Evelyn staggered back, her chest tightening. No, this isn't real. Carter turned, his jaw clenched. Someone's playing a sick game. He grabbed a chair and hurled it at the chalkboard. It shattered on impact, sending dust flying. The whispers grew louder. And then the walls began to change. The shelves crumbled into dust. The chalkboard darkened, the names vanishing. The floor beneath them seemed to shift, as though the room itself was coming apart. Daniel grabbed Evelyn's arm. You have to undo it, he shouted. Evelyn's mind reeled. Undo what? Daniel's expression was desperate. You changed the timeline just by being here. They're trying to fix it. They're trying to make sure you never leave. The whispers turned into a deafening hum. The walls flickered like a dying film reel, reality itself unraveling. Evelyn's heart pounded. She turned back to the chalkboard, gripping the eraser with trembling fingers. If writing their names had bound them to this place, maybe. Without thinking, she wiped the board clean. A piercing scream filled the room. The walls shook violently. The air seemed to shatter like glass. And then, silence. The tunnel was gone. The room was gone. Carter, Evelyn, and Daniel stood in the middle of an empty school hallway, dust particles swirling in the dim light filtering through broken windows. The old school, abandoned for years, was silent. Still. Evelyn's breath came in shaky gasps. She turned to Carter. Did we make it out? Carter ran a hand through his hair, nodding slowly. I think so. Daniel exhaled, his shoulders sagging. It's over, he murmured. But something in his voice didn't sound convinced. Evelyn turned back toward where the chalkboard had been. The wall was blank now, smooth, untouched. But just as she was about to look away, a single name appeared, written in fresh, white chalk. Daniel Harper. Evelyn's heart stopped. She turned to Daniel, but he was already fading. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. It had to be someone, he whispered. And then he was gone. Just like the others. Carter grabbed Evelyn's hand. Come on, he said, his voice tight. Let's get out of here. Evelyn nodded, swallowing back the lump in her throat. Together, they stepped through the broken doors, leaving the past behind. But as they walked away, neither of them saw the chalkboard flicker one last time. And 2 more names appeared. Evelyn and Carter stepped outside, the cold night air hitting them like a wave of reality. The abandoned school stood behind them, silent and still, as if nothing had ever happened. The weight of everything they had just experienced pressed down on them, but neither could find the words to say. They were alive. They had made it out. But Daniel, he was gone. Evelyn turned to look back at the building one last time, half expecting to see something, some sign that what they had gone through was real. But the windows were empty, the halls dark. It was just an old, forgotten place again. Yet, deep in her chest, she felt the pull of something unfinished. She knew the school hadn't let them go entirely. It had only traded for what it had lost. Carter let out a long breath. We need to go, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Evelyn nodded, but her feet wouldn't move. What if it happens again? She asked, barely above a whisper. What if it takes more people? Carter glanced at the school, then back at her. We can't stop it, he admitted. But we can tell the truth. A sudden gust of wind rustled the trees, sending a chill through Evelyn's spine. She wrapped her arms around herself, nodding slowly. They had to make sure no one else disappeared the way Daniel and all those kids had. Someone had to know the truth. They made their way back to town in silence, the events of the night playing over and over in their heads. By the time they reached Carter's car, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the horizon. Everything looked so normal now, the quiet streets, the familiar houses, but Evelyn felt forever changed. As Carter drove, Evelyn stared out the window, her mind racing. She thought of Daniel, of the names on the chalkboard, of the way the school had rewritten history to erase its victims. Was Daniel still somewhere? Or had he truly just vanished? She wanted to believe he had found peace, that his sacrifice had meant something. But deep down, she wasn't sure. When they reached Evelyn's house, Carter put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine. He gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "What now?" he asked. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but filled with determination. "We find proof," she said. "We find a way to make people believe." Carter let out a small, tired laugh. "Yeah. And how do we prove something that just erased itself from history?" Evelyn didn't have an answer, but she knew they had to try. The next few days were spent digging through old records, newspaper archives, anything that might have a trace of the missing students. But every article they found had changed. Where there should have been reports of disappearances, there was nothing. It was as if the students had never existed at all. The town had moved on, forgotten. The school had won. But Evelyn refused to give up. She searched deeper, looking for anything the school might have missed. And then, finally, she found it, one small, overlooked detail. In the town library, buried in the back of an old yearbook, was a faded class photo. It was labeled Class of 1997. But there was something wrong. The names underneath didn't match the faces. And in the background, barely visible, was Daniel. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She traced her fingers over the photo, her heart pounding. Daniel had been real. And this picture, this tiny piece of history, had survived. She showed Carter that night, spreading out the yearbook across his kitchen table. "This is it," she said. "This is our proof." Carter stared at the photo for a long time, then nodded. "So what do we do?" Evelyn exhaled. "We tell the story. We make sure people remember." And so, they did. They wrote down everything, every strange occurrence, every detail about the school, every person who had vanished. They made copies of the yearbook photo, shared it online, spread the word. At first, people thought it was just another urban legend. But then others came forward. People who had lost loved ones. People who remembered shadows in the hallways. People who had almost disappeared themselves. The story grew. The town couldn't ignore it anymore. The school, once left to rot, was suddenly the center of attention. Investigators showed up. The old bricks were torn apart. Beneath the foundation, they found things, fragments of desks, pieces of old shoes, rusted lockers that should have been removed decades ago. And then, in the rubble, they found something else. A chalkboard. Untouched by time. And on it, in faded white letters, were the names. All of them. Including Daniel's. Evelyn stood among the crowd, staring at it, her hands trembling. "He's still here," she whispered. Carter placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But now, people know." And for the first time, Evelyn felt like maybe, just maybe, the school had finally lost. In the weeks that followed, the school was demolished. The land was repurposed. The town did everything it could to erase its haunted past. But Evelyn and Carter knew the truth. Some things don't just disappear. Some stories refuse to be forgotten. And some names never truly fade.